Um, I'll begin because I know this place perhaps a little better than you, Ursula.
Yes.
But it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here tonight because we first met 26 years ago in Leeds. And the person who brought us together was Sister Maureen, who's sitting right here. So our connection with you goes back a long way.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Beverly mentioned that there are many people who have this question, well, what is it to be in the flow? We've never experienced it. What is it like? And for me, I know that when I've taken the time to sit here, to come back to the awareness of the inner being, and to be at peace with myself, and I can connect very easily with the one above, then things become very easy to manage on the external level. This is an inner awareness that one has, but through that then relationships are much sweeter, more natural, don't have to struggle so hard. Things begin to happen in a very natural way also. And somebody mentioned the word synchronicity, and that's absolutely how it works. And we were just hearing the story of how this program got together. They thought of the theme, and somebody heard you on Women's Hour, and your name was mentioned, and Maureen happened to be there. She said, yes, I know this person. And we called you the next day, and here you are. And so when something's meant to be, it happens in a very natural way without having to struggle for it. And so that's very much being in the flow. But it begins with what's going on inside of me. And if I'm not connected with myself, then things become difficult.
Thank you so much, Sister Jayanti. I'm really very pleased to be here. I think this is a wonderful venue and a wonderful evening. I think it's a real gift and blessing to be here, and I'm much looking forward to this conversation. Now, the flow, being in the flow, I mean, we're already in the flow now, a little bit. It is a word, it's an idea that has come into fashion in psychology, particularly since this famous book was published in 1990 about the flow, the psychology of optimal experience, how our abilities match our skills, how our education matches certain tasks and challenges that we meet, tasks that we have to perform. But I think we're also thinking of it in a much deeper level. I feel there is a kind of meeting of awareness and action, and how our awareness flows into the action, how when we are really at one with ourselves, we can also be at one with what we are doing or with our task. And it is a wonderful experience. I mean, it can be a kind of peak experience, a high, but it can also be quite an ordinary experience when we feel satisfied or happy about something that we are doing, that we're in the process of doing, or that a task that we have to accomplish, whatever it is, a very ordinary task like baking a cake or making a meal or looking after some children or caring for a sick person. I mean, something can be in the flow, something can be suddenly appear so deeply satisfying. You know, it's this at-oneing, it's an at-oneness with what we are doing. And we don't have this experience always, and sometimes not very often, but it's a kind of optimal experience to go with the flow, to be in the flow.
You mentioned this inner contentment and satisfaction, and I see that people in the world today have got into this habit of wanting and accumulating. And so we've got a situation where there's consumerism and materialism, and in that process we've really gone so far away from ourselves, and we think that, if I get this thing, there's going to be satisfaction. If I do this, I'm going to be content. And of course it never works out like that. The target keeps moving further and further away. And when there's the awareness of what's going on in my own inner world, and I'm at peace with myself because things are okay, I'm moving in the right direction, I know that I'm aware of the purpose of my life, the deeper significance of why I'm here and what I'm supposed to be doing, then in that state, as I see myself moving there, there's a contentment. And then there's a simplicity that's possible in life, because life isn't about acquisition. It's not about accumulation. And I think that that makes such an important difference in terms of what's happening in the world today. And of course, so often also in relationships, we're waiting for someone else to give me something. And there's a neediness of spirit that we have within, in which we're not able to give, rather than be in a position where we're constantly taking. And so I felt how in my own life, since that development of the relationship with the divine, which before I started with meditation, I didn't know of it. The one above was aware of me, but I wasn't aware of the one above. But when I started to meditate, I could feel the needs that I have within myself being fulfilled. And so the more I practice that awareness, the more I'm able to be full. And so then there's an ability to share. And so that's very much also part of the flow.
Right. I think you have mentioned this word awareness several times, and for me that's really part of the continuing journey, if you want to use that word, or the process, because it's a kind of dynamic, evolving, unfolding process. And the awareness leads to an awakening, an inner awakening. And we need much more of this awakening process in our society today. But the awakening has to lead to deeper spiritual insight and understanding. And I like to use the word spiritual literacy. We don't have enough people who have spiritual literacy, who are attuned to these questions. Because being in the flow, it has something to do also with being attuned to what the flow is. Now, the image of the flow comes originally from water currents. You know, if we swim in the water, we go with the flow. We don't usually swim against the current. That's very, very difficult and very exhausting. We try to flow with the current, not against it. So that's this kind of flow. Now, reading a book this morning, I came across another image which I found quite appealing also, and that is the flow of a flock of birds. You know, all the birds, they go in one direction. They all are together. Now, there is no leader as such, but there is something that moves each individual bird, and together they build up a kind of, we might call it a community at a human level, but there is a kind of intelligence at work, or some kind of movement. There is a flow there in this flight of the birds when you watch a really big flock of birds in the sky. And I find that quite a helpful analogy also, because we are part of a great community, except we see ourselves so much as separate individuals. We are individual, we are apart and separate in one sense, but we're also connected, and it's a kind of almost a contradiction, if you like. We see ourselves as individuals, but we're so interconnected with not only our parents and our siblings and the people we love or friendly with, but with the whole stream of life. And being in the flow is also being in the stream of life.
That's very beautiful. It's an analogy we use within our own spiritual teachings, that you don't see the leader of the birds, but one bird begins to fly, and it sets off a vibration, an intelligence, as you mentioned, that makes others around them also aware, and they all begin to fly at the same time. And the message that we're being given in that is that if you stay stuck down here, and you're flowing with the negativity of the world at the present time, then the energy is going that way. It's not very helpful. But if one individual decides that it's time to lift off and time to move in a different direction, then as they move with that awareness, many others around them are also inspired, and they begin to move in that direction too. So earlier we were talking about how going with the flow can sometimes go with the negative flow that's happening at the present time. But I'm thinking also about the movement of time and the flow of time, and how Some handle the passage of time gracefully and are content that things are moving in the way they should be, that there's a season for all things, the right thing happens at the right time. And yet some people get disturbed by the changes that happen, whether it's in terms of our own physical movement of age, or whether it's in terms of children growing up, or the flow of life generally. And so I'm thinking that at the present moment, it feels as if you're in a very special time, a time when both these things are happening. A negative flow, which is going down there, and you see all the stories in the newspapers, or you hear of the things on the radio and whatever. But it's a very, very strong negative current. But yet you also know that there's beautiful things like this happening, where people are interested to know about bringing about transformation, making a difference to themselves, and also making a contribution to bringing about a change within the world, so that together we can create a better world for all of us and for the future.
Well, I think, this flow is already noticeable. There are eddies and currents and different movements in the world. I sometimes feel, there is a really reason for much hope, really for much hope. And the hope also helps, because the kind of attitude we take and the beliefs we have encourage others to act positively or negatively. So I feel really very strongly in terms of the hope, because if you love life and if you really believe in life and trust life, I feel there is this embeddedness. We are all deeply embedded in something much greater, and we are we dwell in love. We dwell in something which is inexhaustible. And therefore, we should have the deep trust and really think what this means for our everyday life. And what interests me is really, how do you translate spirituality into everyday life? By paying attention to the body, as you say, in terms of aging, in terms of getting older, or in terms of becoming ill. What kind of meaning has that for us at a more deeply spiritual level? But then also paying attention to our surroundings, our neighbors, the needs of people further away. There's so many different kind of levels. But I feel today it's really a question of how can personal spirituality express itself in creating better communities, more flourishing communities, more life-loving communities. And I don't mean this in a hedonistic or party fun sense, even though we sometimes want to have parties and fun. I mean it really in a deeper sense of being a connected community. So for me, spirituality, really this being in the flow, it applies at a personal level, at a social level, and even at a planetary level. It's all those, it's like sort of lots of Russian dolls within each other. Each time the circle becomes larger. And today, I feel we're living in an incredible age, because we have an access to awareness like none of our forebears ever had. There were deeply spiritual people, people with visions, people with great insight, but they were the minority. There were few personalities. Now this is much more widely accessible. We can explore the spiritual heritage. It's a global heritage. It's for all of humankind, from all the faiths, from all the philosophies, from all the literatures, the experiences that people have had, that they can communicate. And through the electronic communications, this is even, augmented exponentially. So our possibility for awareness, there are two possibilities. As you've said, it can be negative or positive. Either we are totally confused and lose all our identity and fear all this because it's just too much, I can't handle it. Or we are extended. Our arms, our heads, our eyes, our ears, everything is extended to a global, to a planetary level. But that means also that we have to extend our hands and our heart and our love for people much other than ourselves. So there is this tremendous calling, if you want to call it that, or the tremendous extension. I see it in terms of emergent humanity and how we have to really develop our consciousness much further, to go much deeper, to come to an awakening where many more people are spiritually really fully alive, because being alive means to be spiritually alive as well as alive in a biological sense.
There's so many different things I'd like to pick up from the things you shared just now. And right at the start, you spoke about the awakening, and you closed again now with that word awakening. And again, it's a very much a term we ourselves use here, in the sense that where I'm living my life just on the external level, then the inner being has gone to sleep. And in that state of ignorance, I'm not able to deal with life. And we see the chaos that's happening in the world around us today, or even we see the chaos that's happening in our own inner world. And that's part of the state of the sleep of ignorance. And the state of awakening, in many mystical traditions, they talk about the third eye and the opening of the third eye. And so that moment of being able to see myself, to be able to see the divine, to be able to see you as my sister, or even in another context, as my brother, soul to soul, brother to brother. It's an awakening process. And once I come into that awareness, then really I can start thinking about a global family. People have used this expression, we're one human family, one human race, one global family, but that's not what we're seeing in terms of what's going on now. And I think that if you're just using these terms just because they're fashionable or just because they sound nice, you can't bring about any change. It's not a reality. But when there's that inner transformation and the awakening has happened within me, and my relationship with you has been altered because of that, and not just you, but my relationship with each one here and the human family has changed, then we begin to see the world in a very different light. And so yes, spirituality is something that happens for me personally, but spirituality is then definitely that which impacts the things that I'm doing and everybody else around me. And people here sometimes say, I'm an optimist because what I see ahead is a world of truth and beauty. But I don't even see myself as an optimist. I feel that surely is the certainty of what's to happen ahead of us, that as human beings evolve, and I think our evolution is actually the awakened state of humanity is a state of divinity. That which is divine within us is awoken. And we start expressing that, well, that's it. When you've got divine human beings who have love and mutual regard and trust, that's what I would describe as heaven.
Right. Heaven on earth, paradise regained or refound.
Really?
Yes, I very much sympathize with you there. I think along similar lines. You see, I would say that I'm interested in how this process is happening. You're describing what's happening to you, or how. But I'm interested in the communication of this experience, of this process, which for me requires or invites the process of education. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily formal education, but I don't exclude that. But education, I mean the process of reflection and of self-reflexivity, of thinking more deeply, of being challenged to think more deeply, because I also think being in the flow has something to do with your awareness and the way you're, as I said at the beginning, the awareness and action becomes a oneness together, and you have that in certain experiences. But through education, you can really open up not only the mind, but the heart, the soul, and to make people aware, to bring them to this awareness. You can do this almost more easily with children than with adults, because children have still got this sense of mystery and wonder, and They love, they want to discover, they want to, hug things, they want to be close to them, they want to have intimacy, whereas we as adults have often grown separate and cold and are aware of our own status or our jobs or our responsibilities, and life gets too complicated, I'm too harassed, and so on. So it's sometimes easier to do it with younger people. But I think we can learn at all levels, and what interests me particularly is, where do we get the resources to feed our zest for life? And you could translate this, to feed the zest for life so that we are in the flow, that we have this experience, that we feel content. And, where are the spiritual energy resources to feed the zest for life? You have so many negative stories, particularly in the press or in, so many, not only negative stories, but also horrible experiences, all the violence in the world, the injustices, the wars. And you think, is there hope for the human community? And we have to ask that question. Is there hope for the human species, or are we so self-destructive that there isn't any hope? Now, that is a question which is unanswerable. But I think we have the responsibility, and we have to learn to take on this responsibility, to work out our own identity, not in a narrow tribal or nationalistic or just a community sense that's very small, but in a planetary sense. We have to see ourselves as a human species that is interrelated. If half of humanity lives a life that's not worth living, that is not good for the other half of humanity. We are in this together, and we have to take on the responsibility. And I think that needs education of an awareness of a particular kind, which ultimately I see as a spiritual awareness, because it involves a deep ethical and moral commitment and engagement, and a responsibility for each other.
I think you might be recalling, I'm sure you've heard the story of the founder Brahma Baba having a vision of a better world.
Right.
And after he'd seen this vision of the transformation of the present world and a beautiful new world that was there in front of him, he had this question. Well, I've seen this vision, and I know I have this sense of resonance with it, that yes, a better world is about to come. And it's like night finishes and the day begins. It's a natural flow of time. And so that's why I was bringing in this idea of time, that there's a natural flow that's at work. The night ends, the day begins, it's natural. And so he was aware that it was this time of transition. But seeing this vision of a better world, he had a question, but how? How do you make it happen? And he came to the same conclusion that you've shared, that it was a process of education, that it was a question of changing human heads and hearts, both together. I can be very moved by something and my heart's being touched, but unless I have the understanding and the capacity to be able to put that into a practical form, it's just going to stay a feeling, it's not going to be a reality. And so he understood that it was a process of education, but spiritual education. And so that's how, from that time, and that is, of course, one of the founders, and so is with us here still today. But from that time, when it was a small group of people in one part of the world, very much a corner of the world, to people now across the world, across all cultures. And I don't just mean the Brahmakumaris, I mean people literally everywhere who are now very aware that it's time for a spiritual revolution. Revolution not in the sense of a violent revolution, but to revolve, to evolve, to move on and come to the next phase. It is time for that awakening. And yes, as we go through that understanding and change ourselves, that's the impact then on others also. And together, I think that is the hope for the future. You said that it's an unanswerable question, and I think that faith is an important ingredient. Faith in time, faith in destiny, faith in the Creator, and to know that, yes, what's ahead of us is a better world.
That's very beautiful. I would fully empathize with that. I think that what you have said shows that, it's not a question about just continuing certain patterns of the past. Like even the religious teachings of the past are, in my view, not sufficient. They can all help us, but nothing is sufficient. No single faith group, no single human group can actually solve all these very, very vital questions for the human community. We need enormous collaborations in all areas, at all levels, across the entire globe. But what I find so exciting is really the access to awareness we have, not only at the spiritual level, but also, from what we know at the scientific level about human evolution and about the whole evolution of life and the evolution of the cosmos. And when we take this beautiful, iconic photograph that the astronauts took from the moon of our planet being suspended in space, this oneness, this beautiful photograph, which is, by the way, called, in case you may not know it, it's called Earthrise, not sunrise, but Earthrise. And Earth has really risen, the planet has risen in our consciousness and awareness like never before. So spirituality has this planetary openness, this possibility of being planetary in a way this was never the case before, even though you have beautiful mystical and poetic expression about attitudes to nature and the beauty and the oneness of nature and of creation. We have so many very, very valuable resources in past traditions, but I think we are also at the threshold of creating something new, which is a blend of the old and the new together. And this call, I feel, this call for humanity to develop a much more inclusive consciousness. And by inclusive, I mean inclusive of otherness, inclusive of diversity, inclusive of other religious traditions, and inclusive of a much greater spiritual vision than was actually possible in the past. You see, a lot of people are very concerned with studying the texts of the past, the teachings of the past, whereas we live in the present and we are responsible for creating the future. And we have to care for the future, for future generations. So we have to care for the earth, and the first thing, we have to care for ourselves as community. And I love to think about these awakening of the energies of love, about which several people have written with very, very powerful words, and that we need love in a greater sense than we have ever needed in the past, and that in the past the loves, human loves, were also too small, too weak, and not sufficiently transformative and powerful at a planetary level.